Sponsors? Yeah. Good morning. Efraim and Chanukah. We begin by thanking our sponsor, Malka Esterson, memory of their parents, and the commemoration of the yahrzeits, Yitzchak, Laib, and Aharon, HaKohen. Sarah Rachel Bas, Baruch Avraham, Hinda, Bas Henech Efraim, Neshama should have an aliyah in the family of Nechama, and in honor of the Rav for all he does for our kehilla and our community. Thank you. Thank you for the Daf Yomi sponsor, to Paul and Kathy Pollock, memory of Paul's aunt, Esther Pollock, Esther Ben Zachariah, and Neshama should have an aliyah in the family of Nechama. We are learning Daf Chaf Aleph this morning. We are up to Chaf Aleph. We are going to begin at the bottom of Chaf 20b. We left off, we were telling nice stories about Rav Huna. And we're up to the words V'chol Damali Shabta. It is 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up. It's in the middle of the line. The last story we learned was about crumbling walls. We're studying a lot about crumbling walls. And, sorry. To the side, it doesn't block. So we're learning about crumbling walls, and the last story was that he used to go out in bad weather and he used to go repair the walls that were falling down. Here the Gemara tells a story about what he used to do on Erev Shabbos. He would send somebody to the marketplace. Imagine this. He used to go every Erev Shabbos. He would go out, he would send somebody out to the marketplace, and he'd buy all the leftover vegetables. What would he do with it? He would chuck it into the river. Okay? The Gemara says, what's he doing this for? He just bought so many vegetables. Why is he throwing it into the river for? Why doesn't he at least give it to aniyim? Make it useful. The Gemara says, Zimnin de samcha datayu mizvit. He didn't want to give free vegetables to the aniyim every single week because he recognized that if they're going to become accustomed to getting free vegetables every single week, they'll never go to the supermarket to go buy it. And he recognized that this is the type of tzedakah that he's going to do, which is ultimately going to have a negative effect. Because if he's going to train the aniyim not to have to ever buy vegetables, because he's always going to give it to them every hour of Shabbos, so then it's going to set a bad precedent for them. He doesn't know that he'll be able to sustain this long term. And if you start something that you can't sustain long term, but you get all the aniyim accustomed to getting free vegetables every hour of Shabbos, so then ultimately he has done a disservice to them, because once the vegetables are not going to come anymore, they're going to be in big trouble. They won't have anything to eat. So therefore he recognized that type of tzedakah, giving free vegetables to aniyim every single week, is something which was not good. So Gemara says, why doesn't you just at least give it to some animals? Everyone has some animals. If you give the vegetables to animals, at least they'll be eaten. So he says, Michoel adam imachil behema. This is not a din of muktzah. We had a similar concept when it came to muktzah, of muchel adam and muchel behema. But the idea over here is that it's not appropriate for a person to take food from a human being and then use that food for animal food. There are human beings l'chud and animals l'chud. You don't share dinner with your animal. Of course, you feed your animals, but the same food that you use for yourself, you don't give to the animals. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. So what do you go buy it for? What's the point in going to buy the vegetables? I actually have a friend. He used to tell me his wife would come home and she would buy a lot of cucumbers. And he would go straight to the bag of cucumbers and he would take 2 or 3 of them and put them straight in the garbage. His wife would say to him, what are you doing? I just bought these cucumbers. And he says, at the end of the week, when they're all moldy, I'm usually the one who puts them in the garbage. So I figured I'll take 2 or 3 out right now and put it straight in the garbage. I don't know if that was such a great shalom bayis idea, but ultimately, what's the point in him going out to the supermarket to go buy all these vegetables to throw them in the river? Nobody else could have thrown them in the river. he had to be the one to go buy it to throw it in the river. What's the point in that? The Gemara says, because he was concerned that if those who are selling the food in the market are not going to sell all the vegetables, what they're going to say, next week let's bring less. So if they're going to bring less, then next week perhaps more people are going to need vegetables. It won't be enough. So he wanted to make sure that there was always a surplus of vegetables, and the farmers are going to bring the proper amount of vegetables to the supermarket, and he didn't want them, and at the same time, he didn't want to give it out, so he was stuck. In other words, he wanted there to be enough vegetables for everyone to buy. If there were leftovers, he wanted to buy them to make sure to bring them the next week, and he didn't want to give them out to Aniyim, because then he's going to set a precedent that free vegetables every Friday. So therefore, and he didn't want to give them to behemoths because it wasn't appropriate to give person food to animals. So therefore, what did he do? He threw it into the river. So now, Rashi actually says that throwing it into the river wasn't just wasting it. If you see Rashi, he says, it's in the Rashi, Ein machilin os lebehem at the end. He says, V'zarak lenahar, he threw it into the river, V'holchin lemakom acher. The river could take them to another place. They could float, and they can go to another place. In other words, he wasn't entirely just throwing them in the garbage. He was putting them in the river, and that gave the ability for the vegetables to travel to another town. And essentially, people would go. We know nowadays people don't spend that much time hanging out at the river. But when you have to do your laundry, and that's where you do your laundry, so if people are sitting there doing laundry and they say, "Hey, look, lunch is coming down the river." So that was something which people actually took out vegetables. You don't have to have a hechsher on a cucumber. So therefore, it actually served the purpose. It wasn't just like throwing it in the garbage. It served the purpose. And again, that's not something that people are going to come to rely on, because it's not like someone's giving out free vegetables. So his idea was it had benefit on both sides. First of all, the marketplace will all be stocked. Second of all, he wasn't entirely wasting them. Third of all, he wasn't creating a precedent for the aniyim. And that was something special about Rav Huna. There's another story about Rav Huna. When he ever had a medical need, havi mali kuza demaya v'tali b'seifa debesa. He would fill up a little jug of. What did you say? Did I skip something? That was the imachil behema. In other words, kasavra Michoel adam imachil behema. That's why he didn't want to give the food to the animals. So when he had a medical need, he would hang it on the door of his house. He would say, "Call the boy." Anybody who needed it could come take. Amri milsa deshivta heavy gomer heavy monach kuza demaya. So this is Rashi says milsa deshivta is minik sheidim shmazik lemi sheyochav enot yadav. There was some type of plague of shadim, that if people would eat without washing their hands, they would get sick. So when that was going around, he would have imanach kuza demaya v'dali leiv amar kol tzarach leisav v'leo lo l'stakim. He'd put water outside his house like this. Anybody could wash their hands, so they'll be protected. Ki hevi karach rifta, hevi pasach libevei v'amar kol tzarach leisav lecha. Whenever he would eat, he would open the door to his house and say anybody who wants to eat could come in as well. Amar Rava. So Rava says, Kula matzina mekaima. This is a very interesting thing here. We have this story, and Rava is listening to this story, and he says, you know what? It's beautiful. It's a really beautiful thing. I could put the medicine outside the house. I could put water outside for people to wash their hands. However, lebar meha. In other words, I'm trying to emulate Rav Huna, and I could copy all the things that he's doing. But this thing I can't do. I can't put lunch outside my house every time I sit there to eat lunch. I can't do that because there are too many bnei chela in Mechuzah where he lived. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Rashi says Rashi understands that there were too many aniyim. Where Rava lived, if he would do that, he would just not be able to sustain it. So he recognized there are certain things he's able to emulate about the behavior of Rav Huna, and to hear a beautiful story about somebody, which is also, it's a good point to point out. Sometimes people just tell stories for the sake of just telling stories. And it's good to tell stories, it's exciting. But when you hear a story that has a good lesson in it, the point is to be able to say, how can I emulate that lesson? How can I make that part of my life? How can that actually mean something for me? So Rava did that, but he recognized that it would be unsustainable for him to emulate that behavior of Rav Huna, to give lunch to somebody else every time he ate lunch, because simply it would just not be possible to keep up with it. The Gemara continues telling stories about shaky walls. Ilfa of Rav Yochanan have a garsi boraisa. Ilfa and Rav Yochanan were talking and learning. Dachikalahu milsa tuva. They reached the point where the poverty had taken over them. They had become extremely, extremely poor. They had no money. So Amri, they said, Nekim v'nezel v'nevet iska. Let's go out and do some business. V'nekayim b'nafshin efes kilo yeh b'cha evyon. So look at the way they termed this. They understood the priority in their life was to sit and learn. It's Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? Now they recognized this is what they had to do with themselves, but they reached a point that their learning caused them to be so poor that they simply weren't able to support themselves. So how do they phrase this? They said, the pasuk, the Torah teaches us that efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyon. You have to stop at the point that you're going to be stricken by poverty. So they said, let's stop learning. So like this, we can become a mitzvah in the Torah. Like this, we won't be so poor. Azlum, they went in Osve to Teguda Re'iyah. They went on their mission to go do some business. Where did they sit? Under a shaky wall. Karchi Rifta. First thing you do is go out and eat lunch. Karchi Rifta, they went out and they made themselves a sandwich. And Asu Trei Malachi Asharis. 2 Malachi Asharis came. And Shamei Rav Yochanan heard these 2 Malachi Asharis in a conversation. The Marsha says that these 2 Malachi Asharis are the Malachi Asharis that escort everybody wherever they go, whenever they go someplace, and they're there with everybody. We don't always have the opportunity to hear them. Rabbi Yochanan sat down and he heard these 2 Malachi Asharis. They were talking to each other. One of them said to his friend, Nishtei alayu haigudu v'naktalinu. Let us push this shaky wall on top of Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa, and we'll kill them. Why? Shemanichin chai olam haba v'oskim v'chayisha. Talking about Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa over here. And these people, we can imagine what the Torah looked like when they sat down and they talked and learning, and they ultimately left learning Torah. Why? For the sake of supporting themselves. Now, just again, going back to the Marsha really talks about the concept of ayin hara. I don't know if he says it's so clear, but ultimately the point is that generally speaking, we don't cause ourselves to have to go through a din Torah every single time. We don't sit in front of the Beis Din Shel Maila every moment to determine should we be punished or should we not. These two malachim, the Marsha says there's one on the right side, that's the one who advocates for good. There's one on the left side who advocates for not such good things. And here, finally what happened was they changed their lifestyle. They did something different. When someone changes their lifestyle and they put themselves in a dangerous situation, they changed their lifestyle and they sat under a shaky, unstable wall which was about to collapse. So now they put themselves into a situation of a din Torah. In other words, they find themselves being judged on their own accord because they did something. They sat in a dangerous place. At that point in time, the Malach from the left side said, "You know what? Here's my opportunity to ultimately punish him." And the reason for that was they decided to leave go of Chayei Olam Haba, which is learning Torah, to ultimately spend time making a living. Amar le idach, the other one said, Shevkinu, leave them alone. Why? Between these two people, one of them ultimately is going to reach a very important point in their life. And we're talking about very special people over here. Please don't knock down the wall. The consequence for Klal Yisrael is going to be too much. We can't allow them both to be killed. So now, what happens? Rabbi Yochanan Shama. Rabbi Yochanan was sitting there. He heard this conversation. Ilfa lo Shama. Ilfa did not hear the conversation. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan Ilfa. Rabbi Yochanan said to Ilfa, Shama marmidi, did you hear someone talking about something? Amar le lo. I did not hear anybody talking about anything. As a matter of fact, I'm quite sure nobody said anything. We're sitting here together, just the two of us, and he said, I did not hear anybody say anything. Amar, Rabbi Yochanan said, Mideshami ana, since I heard about this, the Ilfa lo shama, Ilfa did not hear this conversation, Shmamina, I can hear from this, I can infer from this, Lididi kaima lishaita. I recognize that for me, I'm going to reach that point, I'm going to grow, I'm going to be somebody very special, and therefore, Amar le Rav Yochanan ahadar v'uki benafshay. I'm going to go back and I'm going to establish for myself ki lo yechtal evil mikarav haaretz. Of course, when I left my full-time learning to go out and do some business, I did so under the halacha of efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyon. I did it because I was trying to make sure that I will not be an evyon. I won't be a poor person who has to come out to others. But you know what? Sometimes you have to focus on another pasuk. The other pasuk, which just states the reality of the world, which is ki lo yechtal evyon mikarav haaretz. The Torah guarantees us that the cycle of poverty will always be there. There always will be poor people. And he said, you know what? I will be that guy. It could be that originally I thought that I'm supposed to be mekayim for myself. I should fulfill for myself the pasuk kol yeh b'cha evyon, efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyon. You should take all your avodas Hashem to the point that you don't become poor. But says Rav Yochanan, I see from this story that it's so important for me to spend my time learning Torah and growing in Torah and becoming big in Torah. I am that one person who has to be mekayim that pasuk of ki lo yechtal evyon mikarav achecha. There always will be mikarav haaretz. There always will be somebody in the world who's poor, and Rabbi Yochanan embraced that with love. He said, "That's going to be me. I'm going to do that." So Rabbi Yochanan hadar ilfa lo hadar. Rabbi Yochanan turned around. He made an about face. He went back to the base medrash and he sat down and he learned. Ilfa, on the other hand, continued. He went on and he joined the corporate world. Ada'asa Ilfa, by the time Ilfa came back from his business trip, Malach Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan had already become king. Now, what does it mean, Malach Rabbi Yochanan? He was not a king. So Rashi tells us something very important here. Malach Rabbi Yochanan, it's the third skinny line in Rashi. Minuhu Rosh Yeshiva Aleim. By the time he came back, he was appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva. And Rashi says, Minoghu, it was the custom, Mishahu Rosh Yeshiva, the one who was the dean, the head of the institution, he was the head of school, Hayu Magadlin Oso Mishalahem. They would make him big from their own money. Uma Ashirin Oso. The minig over there was, if you were the Rosh Yeshiva, they made sure that he wasn't just supported, he was wealthy. They gave him a tremendous amount of assets. Just like a Kohen Gadol was somebody who was supported from the community, so too the Rosh Yeshiva, the one who was the head of the yeshiva, he also was supported from the community, became wealthy. So here we have such an interesting turn of events. Rabbi Yochanan sacrifices to go back because he wanted to ultimately reach his potential to be able to become somebody very big in Limud Torah. He understood then. He did it because the pasuk says, "Ki lo yechtal evyon mikarav haaretz." There always will be one poor person. He accepted that with love. That's what we wanted to be. He said, "I will be great in Torah and I'll be very poor." Ultimately, what happens? He becomes great in Torah. People recognize his Torah. People appreciate his Torah. He becomes appointed as the Rosh HaYeshiva, and he does not have to worry about being the poorest person in the world, because ultimately what happens is he is supported from the community. So now Azal, Ilfa, you can understand he came back and he felt very bad. So Tala Nafshi Ba'askarya Desfini. He went and he stood on the mast of the boat. And he said, Amar, I achil I'ika desha'eli b'masnisa d'Rabchia Raboshia. If anybody will come ask me any questions in any of the brisos of Rabchia and Raboshia, which were known to be true, v'lo pashtina le masnis, and I won't be able to bring a raya from it from another Mishnah. Nafilna me'askarya desvinta v'tavana. I'm going to jump off this boat and I'm going to drown. In other words, Ilfa recognized that people perhaps didn't appreciate his accomplishments and his ability to learn Torah. And what he said to them was, lest anybody believe that I left the world of Limud Torah to go into the world of business and I've completely forgotten about learning, I don't know anything, I've become a big Amaretz. Here I go, I want you to know, I'm ready, I'm up for the test. Test me, ask me about any brisa from Rabchia and Raboshia, and I will be able to back it up from a Mishnah. Asahu Hahusaba, an old grandfather came by, And Tanaleh, he learned to him the following. Kaomer, Tenu shekel lebanai b'Shabbos. Person is about to pass away, and in his will, it's not in his will, he verbally says, give a shekel to my sons every single week. V'hein ru'uyin los islam sela. They counted up his money, and they recognized he has enough money, but besides having enough money, they recognized the cost of living was more than a shekel a week. Imagine that. A shekel a week to support yourself. They realized that, no, it costs more than a shekel a week. You need to have 2 shekel, which is a selah. So the halacha is nosen lahem selah. You give a selah. Even though the father asked to give the children a shekel, his intention was that they should have enough money to support themselves. So therefore, even though he said give a shekel, give a selah. However, v'im amar al titnu lahem el shekel, don't give them any more than a shekel. A nosen lahem el shekel. Then you give specifically what he said. You only give 1 shekel, even though it's not enough money. The Gemara continues, Im Amar Mesu Yarshu. Im Amar Mesu, when my children die, Yarshu Acherim Tachteim, other children should ultimately get what other people should get what's left over from the Yerusha. In other words, he clearly stipulates, give a shekel a week, and now when my children die, take the leftovers and give it to the following person. So Bein Amar Tenu, whether he just said give them a shekel, like the first way we learned. Bein Amar Al Titnu, whether he said don't give them more than a shekel, in any case, a nosen lahem el shekel, we only give the children 1 shekel. And he gives the leftovers to whoever's there. In other words, the point is, we have a situation here, a person has money. He leaves it behind to his children, to his yarshim, and he says, give them a shekel. And then he dies. So we're trying to figure out what he meant. So therefore, what we say is, if the cost of living cost a selah, you give more than a shekel because he ultimately wanted to support his children. But if he was clear and he said, don't give more than a shekel, then we only give them a shekel, even though it doesn't cover the cost of living. This is talking about, I didn't mention this is talking about when someone was appointed as the caretaker of the money. Obviously, it's no one else's business to get involved in someone else's Yerusha. This is a situation where someone was appointed to take care of the money. Now, the last case is where he designates somebody else as the one who's going to get the leftover money. In that case, again, the Brisa says that they only get 1 shekel a week, and the leftover goes to those yarshim. So now he ultimately wanted to know, where does this come from? What is the source of this? Amar lei, so Ilfa said to him, Hamani Rameir. Sure, I can back this one up. This is clear. This is a Mishnah. It's Rameir. The Amar mitzvah l'kayim divrei ames. There's a mitzvah for a person to be l'kayim divrei ames. This is the whole discussion where a mace says something just as just at the time that they're about to pass away, and it's different than the assumption would have been. So if I'm remembering correctly, I believe the case was a person has a daughter, and he says to give the money to her, and not to give it to her husband, which would ultimately normally be the way that you would do it. So the halach is you give it to her anyway, because it's mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames. So in other words, the point over here is that you give the money specifically to the person mentioned by the deceased, and you carry out the will of the deceased, and Ilfa backed that one up. The Gemara continues talking about shaky walls. Amru alav al Nacham ish Gamzu. They said on the following person whose name was Nacham ish Gamzu. Shahayasum mishteinav. He was blind in both eyes. Gidem mishtei yadav. He was not able to use both of his hands. Kita mishtei raglav. Both of his feet were amputated. Chal gufam al ishchin. His entire body was filled with boils. Vayamuta b'beis ru'ua. He lived in a very dilapidated home. V'ragli mitaso munachim b'sefalim shamayim. The legs of his bed were placed into buckets of water. Why did they do that? Kedei shlo ya'alu alav nemalim. It's like this: no ants should climb up the posts of his bed and go on to Nacham ish Gamzu, because he couldn't get them off. He didn't have hands or feet, so if an ant went on him, it's tremendously disturbing. Nothing he was able to do about it. So therefore, they put the legs of his bed into water. Like this, the ants have no way to cross over that, kind of like a moat. They couldn't get in there because they had to get through the water to get onto his bed. There was one time while his bed was in this weak house, this dilapidated home. And Bikshu Talmidim Lefanos Pitaso. His Talmidim said, listen, Rebbe, you can't live in this house. The whole thing's going to fall down. And afterwards, V'yachar kach Lefanos Esakelim. He wanted to empty out the house. Amar Lahem, he said to them, Banai, first, Panu Esakelim, take out whatever I have, my possessions inside the house. V'yachar kach Panu Espitasi. Take out my bed afterwards. Why? Shemuftach lachem. It is guaranteed to you. Shekol zman shani bebayis. As long as I am in the house, ein habayis nofel. The house is not going to fall on me. So therefore, use your time to get all the other things out of the house and leave me for last. Like this, I will be able to sustain the house as long as I'm in here. The house won't fall down. What did they do? Pinuas kalim. They first took out all the kalim. V'yachakach pinuas mitaso, and immediately after they took out his bed, boom, nafal habayis. The house collapsed. So Amrlo Talmidav. His Talmidim said. So I should just point out the Marsha was trying to speak out less things today because we're already running out of time. And we went over time yesterday. But there's an important Marsha over here, just to compare it to yesterday's Amud. Yesterday's Amud, Rav Ada bar Hava was very upset when they used him to keep the storage house up. He was brought there because of his chus to keep it up. So why is it that Nachum Mishgamzu himself actually advocates for himself to keep the house up? And Rav Ada bar Hava was so upset when they brought him there to keep the storage house up. So the Marsha says the difference is Menachem Ish Gamzu was a tzaddik gamor. There was nothing wrong with Menachem Ish Gamzu. He was flawless, and therefore he was completely 100% comfortable with using his chusim to keep up the house. Rav Ada bar Hava, as much as we learned such beautiful things about Rav Ada bar Hava, he wasn't classified as a tzaddik gamor. And therefore, he was nervous that's going to take away from his chusim to keep the house up. That's what the Marsha says. So anyway, Amrlo Talmidav. His Talmidim said to him, Rabbi, v'chimiachar shetzadik gomor. The Gemara says very clear here. V'chimiachar shetzadik gomor ata. I mean, Rabbi, you're a tzaddik gomor. There's nothing wrong with you. You're flawless. So lama also l'chakach. Why do you have such a terrible life? This is the kasha of tzaddik varalo. Again, the Marsha says the same thing over here. A tzaddik gomor does not have ralo. Tzaddik v'ralo is by good people. Tzaddik gomor does not have to experience a terrible life. So they asked him, you're a tzaddik gomor. Why do you have all these terrible struggles in your life? Amar lahem, Banai, ani garamti le'atzmi. I brought this upon myself. Why? There was one time I was going, I was traveling to my in-laws. V'haya imi masoi Gimel chamorim. I had 3 donkeys loaded up. Echad shamaycha, one of them was with food. Echad shamishta, the other one had all types of drinks on it. V'echad shamini megadim, the other one was filled with all types of other exciting foods. Ba'ani echad v'amad li b'derech. A poor person approached me, and he stood in my way. V'amar li, he said to me, Rebbe, parnaseni, I see you have so much, please can you give me something to eat? Amarti lo, I said to him, Hamtein ad she'efrok min hachamar. He said, let me take a few minutes to unload it from the chamar, and I'll give you what to eat. And then says Nachum Ish Gamzu, lo hispakti lifrok min hachamar. Did not have enough time to take it off the chamar. Ad sheyatzasan ishmaso. It took me too long to get him some food, and the guy died. So therefore, halachti v'nafalti apanav. I fell on my face v'yamarti, and I said, Eini shlichasu alinecha yasumu. My eyes, who did not have mercy on your eyes, they should become blind. Yadai shlichasa yadecha yiskadmu. My hands that did not have rachmanis, have mercy on your hands, should become chopped off. Ragli shlochasu al raglecha. My feet that did not have rachmanis on your feet should be amputated. Yiskatu should be amputated. I did not calm down. Ad sha'amarti kol gufa yehem al yishkin, until I said that my whole body should be filled with skin, with boils. So they said, Amrulai, ay lanu shar'inu bekach. And they said to him, we just can't tolerate this. This is so bad. We have to see you under such conditions. And Amr lahem, he said to them, ay li im loy ri'inucha bekach. What would be with me if you would not see me this way? In other words, he was essentially saying, I'm earning my place in Olam Haba, in the Olam HaEmes, by living a life like this. So just very quickly, what did he do wrong? I mean, the guy wanted something to eat. He said, let me get it for you. I mean, what was he supposed to do? He said, wait a second till I get it off the back of the chamar. I mean, what else could he have done other than say, sure, give me a second, let me unlock the trunk and get the food out. He went to the trunk to get it, and the guy died. So I didn't see this anywhere. I didn't really look around enough, but what hit me must have been, he must have not gone right away. He must have said, you know what, I'm going to be at a rest stop in a few minutes. Why don't you meet me at the rest stop on the turnpike? When I stop for gas, I'll open up the trunk, I'll open up the suitcase, and I'll get it out. In other words, there must have been some element of a delay there. Maybe he even said, wait till I get to my in-laws when I unload the suitcase, because we know he's going to his in-laws. So maybe he said when he gets to his in-laws, that's when he'll give him the food. It must be that there was some conscious delay that was made here. It wasn't just wait until I can get the stuff off the back of the chamar. Why did the guy have this name, a strange name of Nachamish Gamzu? The Gemara says, the Kamilsa Tavisalkale Omar Gamzu Latova. Anytime anything happened to him, he always said Gam Zulatova. Again, the Maharsha deals with the fact that the Gemara in Maseches Brachos tells us that a person should always say Kol Mad Avraham Latav Avid, and he gives a difference between Kol Mad Avraham Latav Avid, difference between Latav Avid, where you ultimately recognize that things are bad, but you say something good will come out of it. And Gam Zulatova means not only is something good going to come out of it, but Gam Zu Latova. This thing actually itself is good. So he was one level higher than what the Gemara says in Maseches Brachos. Anyway, Zim Lechad, Bo Lishtur Yisrael Doron LeBekeser. The Jewish people wanted to send a gift to the Bekeser, to the government. And Amru, Man Yesel, who should bring it? Yesel Nachamish Gamzu. He should be the person who should go. Why? He's somebody who has experienced all types of miracles in his life. Shadru Bey Mali Sifta Davanim Tovos Margalios. They sent a whole sack of precious stones and all types of gems. Azal Bas Bahudira. He went and he stayed over one night in an inn. And Balelia Kamu Hanach Diure Vishaklinhu Lesifta Umalunahu offer. What did they do? His host found his suitcase. They opened up the suitcase. They took out all the jewels, all the precious stones. What did they do? They filled it up with dirt. Lamachar, the next morning, Kichazinhu, when he noticed what happened, Amar, he said, Gamzul Tova, must be good. And he went on. Kimat el Hasam, he got there. Sharinu Lesifta, and Chaznu Demal Afra. So if you'll notice that when it says Lamachar, the next morning, when he got there, it says, the next morning he saw it, he said Gamzul Tova, it's in parentheses. And I think it probably should not be read, because had he recognized before he got there that his suitcase was full of dirt, it would have been highly irresponsible to show up to the Kesar and say, here I have something so special for you, a couple of mud pies that the kids made from outside. You don't do that. So therefore, it would have been, it's nice for him to say Gamzul Tova, but it would have taken a tremendous amount of risk to go ahead and say Gamzul Tova, so therefore I'm going to give a gift to somebody. He could have said Gamzul Tova and gone back home and said, listen, we tried to give a gift, but it didn't work. So that's why I think that line has to be taken out. Anyway, Bo Malka, ultimately, when he gave the gift, Sharindu Lasifta Chazinu Dmali Afra, when he gave the gift, and they noticed that it was full of dirt, Bo Malka Miktalinu Kuli, wanted to kill all the Jews. He said, this is what the Jews send me. The Jews send me a gift, they send it in the hands of this guy, he shows up here and he's all excited, he gives me a gift, a box, imagine the wrapping paper, all the ribbons on the outside, he opens it up and it's full of dirt, he wanted to kill all the Jews. Amar, the Jews are making a joke out of me. Amar Gamzul Tova. So this is the appropriate place to put it. So says Nachamish Gamzu, I did what I had to. I gave the gift. It didn't work out. Gamzul Tov must be good. Also Eliyahu Navi came and Ad Milei Kichad Minayu. He made him look like one of the members of the government. And Amar Le Dilma Ha'afra Mi Afra Avraham Avuhanhu. Maybe this is the dirt of Avraham Avinu. What was that? Ki Havi Shadi Afra Havi Saifra. When he would throw dirt, it turned into knives. And Gali Havi Giri. When he would throw other types of dirt, it would turn into arrows. The Siv Yitin Ka'afar Charbo, his dirt became like a sword. Kekash, the straw was Nidaf, Kashto was like the bow and arrow. Havi Chada Medinta. The low matzil michbash was the michbash. So there was one country that the Caesar could not conquer. And Bad Kumine, they checked out this dirt, the Kavshua, and it worked. Ultimately, they said, listen, you gave us such an unbelievable, such an invaluable gift. We're finally able to conquer this land. What they do, they filled up a whole suitcase filled with all types of precious jewels and precious stones, and they gave him a tremendous amount of covet, and they sent back Nachamish Gamzu, they sent him back home. So at the end, what happened was, he went with a suitcase filled with jewels. His suitcase was replaced with dirt. He gave the dirt to the Caesar. The Caesar appreciated that dirt so much because it turned into all types of ammunition to ultimately conquer their enemy. What happened? They said, what a wonderful gift you gave us. Because of that, they filled up his suitcase full of precious stones and all types of beautiful gems. They sent him back with a tremendous amount of kava. So now, Kiasu Besa Bahahu Diura, he went back home with his load, and he went to stay in the same inn. He stayed in on the way there. Amrulay, they said to him, "My Isis bahadach the avdilach yakar kulihai." What did you give them that made them give you such a high level of respect? So Amar lahu, "My deshakli mihacha amati lahasam." Whatever I took from here is what I gave them. Whatever dirt was in the thing. So now, what do? They said, we must have some type of magical power here. There must be something really special with our dirt. So what did these guys do? Sasru lidiurayu. All the people in town destroyed their homes. They took all the dirt. Imagine all those dumpsters filled of all the broken down homes. They brought it to the king. Amrulay, hi after the icy hacha mididanhu. Imagine that they're standing there, they're patting themselves on the back, they're saying that dirt that you won the war with, you think he's a good guy who brought it for you, he just took some of our stuff. But Kua, they checked out the dirt, we found that it was just dirt. And they ultimately killed these people. So you show up with a big dump truck full of dirt, dump it out over here, it's worthless. They were killed. Gemara is now paraphrasing the Mishnah. Eza hu dever Ir Hamotzia Chamesh Meos Ragli, a city that has 500 people, and we see that there's a similar price. Tanabanan Ir Hamotzia Chamesh Meos ve'elaf Ragli, a city that has 1,500 people. Kigon Kfar Akum v'yatzu menu Tisha Mesim, and 10 people died b'shlosha yamim. In other words, 3 a day. Zeh achar zeh, one after the other. Harei zedever. That's considered a plague. In other words, 1,500 people, 9 people died, 3 people each day. That's a plague. Biom echad. If they all die in one day, obadal yamim, or in 4 days, in other words, it's not consecutive, ein zedever. In other words, it has to be consistent, 3 people every single day, not 9 people in 1 day, and not 9 people in 4 days. The year Amatzia Chamesh Meos Ragli, a city that has 500 people, able-bodied people, could go in Kfar Amiku, v'yatzam imenu shlosha mesim, and 3 people died there, begimel yamim in 3 days, zeh achar zeh, consecutively, harei zedever. In other words, it's exactly like our Mishnah. However, b'yom echad, they all die in 1 day. Oh, bar b'yamim, if they die in 4 days, ein zedever, that's not considered a plague. The Gemara tells us, Durokras ir hamotzia chamesh meos ragli. It was a city that had 500 people in it. Heavy v'yatzu menu shlosha mesim b'yom echad. 3 people died in 1 day. So it was a city that had 500 people, and 1 day, 3 people died. Gazer of Nachman Baruch Chista, Taanis of Nachman, the son of Rav Chista, instituted a fast on that day. Amar Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, "Come on, who are you following?" Kurameir. He was following Kurameir. The Amar Richik Nigichosav Chayev Kir Nigichosav Lokoshakein. This is talking about a ox that gores. The halacha is a ox that gores 3 times has to then pay nezek shalem. The first 3 times that an ox gores, it only pays half the damage. Once an ox gores a 3rd time, then it becomes a muad, and then is responsible for all of the damage. So now the question is, what happens if it gores 3 times in 1 day? Meir is of the opinion that if we turn it into a muad after goring 3 times in 3 days, since certainly it would be a muad if it gores 3 times in 1 day. So he's of the opinion if an animal gores 3 times in 1 day, it falls into the category of a muad, an animal which is scheduled to do all types of damage, and therefore has to pay the full price. So Amar Le Rav Nachman Bar Chisda Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Leika Mar and Leisei Gaban. They liked him, and they said, "Why don't you come move to our area?" Amar le Tanina. We learned to the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Lo Mekomo Shel Adam Mechabdo Ela Adam Mechabedus Mekomo. It's not the place that causes a person to be respectful. The person is respectful because of what they do, and they bring honor to that place. The same thing is true. We find this with our Sinai. As long as the Shechina was there on Har Sinai, then Amra Torah Gamatzon Bakar Al Yiru El Mul Haharahu. It was such a special place, and animals cannot graze there. Why? Because the Shechina is there. However, Nistalka Shechina, once the Shechina leaves, Nistalka Shechina Mimenu, once the Shechina leaves from Har Sinai, Amra Torah, the Torah says, Mshoch Yovel Hahema, Mshoch Yovel Hema Ya'alu Bahar. Indeed, the animals can go there with time. So you see clearly it's not the place that brings the honor, it's the thing that is in the place. So if the Shekhinah is there, if the divine presence is there, then Har Sinai becomes a special place. If it's not there anymore, it's not special anymore. Same thing is true as the Ohel Moed Shebemidbar. The Ohel Moed was in the Midbar. Shekolz Machu Natoi. As long as it is set up, then Amar Torah v'yishlechu ben amachna kol tzurua. As long as the Ohel Moed, the temporary place of the avoda, the traveling mishkan was there. So then they had to send out anybody who was a tzuru, anybody who had saras, who had spiritual leprosy. Huglulu haparoches. Once they rolled up the paroches, hutru zavim v'amotzuram likanas hasham. All types of people who were tamei were able to go there. So again, we see it's not the place that is special; rather, it is the people in the place. So ultimately, what was happening here was, so Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak was saying, you want me to move to your town because there's special people there, because it's a special place. It's not the place to live in, it's about being a positive influence of the place that you live. Why do you want me to leave my place to go live in your place? Let me stay here and make this place into a better place. Amar Lei, they said to him, if so, Nekum Anol Gabe Mar, let us move to you. So Amar Lei said to him, no, Mutav, even though it's not the place which is special. Rather, it's the people that are living there. Mutav yavo mana ben pras, it's a mana ben mana. It's better that we'll just use the dollar term. It's better than that a dollar who is the son of 50 cents should go to a place where the dollar is the son of a dollar. In other words, he's saying that his father was not so good, and it's indicated in Rashi. It's indicated in the name that his father was not introduced by the name Rav. It was Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, as opposed to Rav Nachman. The other one was Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chista. So his father was more special. In other words, he was saying it's better that a person who's the son of a Talmud Chacham and also a Talmud Chacham should not have to move to a person who is a Talmud Chacham whose father was not a Talmud Chacham. Va'al Yava Mana Ben Mana Eitz Mana Ben Pras. Okay, Besura, in the town of Suravi Dabarta, there was a plague. Bishvivusa Durav, in the neighborhood of Rav. Besura Havi Dabarta. There was a plague in Surah. Bishvivusa Durav Lo Havi Dabarta. In the neighborhood of Rav, there was no plague. Savru Minei Mishum Zechuse Durav. They thought it must have been because of the merits of Rav. The Nafish, because he had so many zechusim. It's chazaylu b'chalma. They thought, again, just read this together to read it the right way. Savru minei mishum zechusei de Rav the Nafis. They thought it was because of the many zechusim that Rav had that he saved the city from a plague. As chazaylu b'chalma, they had a dream. The Rav, the nefisha zechusei, Rav had so many zechusim, so many merits. Tuva hamilsa zutrale. This is like nothing for him to save the city from a plague. That's not even a big deal, and that was not the reason why it was saved. Rather, Hamilsa Zutrus Rav. Ella Mishum Hahu Gavra the Shayel Marav Zavila Likvura. There was one person in town, he'd always lend his digging equipment to the Chevra Kadisha to allow them to do Kivura. Bidrokras Havi Lu Delicta, there was a fire. Vishivusa Rav Huna Lo Havi Delicta. In the neighborhood of Rav Huna there was no fire. Savramene, they thought, Vizachusa Rav Huna, the Nafish, because he had so many Zachusim, he saved the place from a fire. And again, Eskazul B'Chilma, they had a dream. And Hay Zutrale, the Rav Huna. This is nothing for Rav Huna to save the city from a fire. You don't need Rav Huna. As they say, this is small potatoes. Ela mishum who he eats because of this woman. The mechamas tanura she would heat up her oven umeshali l'shrivusa, and she would lend it to all of her neighbors. Amr lei Rav Yehuda asu kamtzi. They told Rav Yehuda that there are all types of locusts coming. We saw when locust comes, make a Taanis. Gazar Tanisa, he instituted a fast day. Amrle, they said to him, there's no reason to worry about this. Loka mafsadan, they're not actually attacking the food. So he said to them, Amrlahu, he said to them, Zavda Aisi B'Hadayu, did they come with like their luggage? Did they show up with luggage, with a food package? They came with provisions to support themselves. What do you think they're going to do when they get here? When they get here, they'll be hungry. They're going to have to eat. Amrle, Rav Yehuda, Ika, Musnu B'Chaziri, there's some type of plague in the pigs. Gazar Tanisa, he instituted a fast. Nema Kasavar of Yehuda, Maka Mushleches, must be the reason why he instituted a fast, because it must be this is something which is contagious. It's Maka Mushleches Mimin Ach Echad. Mushleches Bikal Minim. Something, a Maka, plague that hits one type of min, one type of species, ultimately is going to be a plague that hits all the types of minim. The Gemara says, "Laib, it's not true." The stomach of pigs is similar in its anatomy to the stomach of humans, and therefore he was worried about it. Amar le Shmuel, they said to Shmuel, "Ika musna bechuzai." They pointed out to Shmuel that there was a plague, and Gazra Tanisa. And the plague was in Chuzai. Gazar Tanisa, he instituted a fast day. Amarle, he said to him, they're very far away. Amarle, Amar leka man, leka ma'avrahacha. There's no way to cross over from there to here. So leka ma'avrahacha to pasukle. In other words, let's do this right. There was a plague in the city of Chuzai. Gazar Tanis instituted a fast. Amarle, they said to him, Marachik, it's very far. Why are you making a fast about this plague that's happening somewhere so far away? It's far away, it's not relevant to us. Amar, he said, Leka ma'avra hacha the pasuk. There is no river that separates us. In other words, we have the ability to get sick anyway. Amarle, Rav Nachman, Ika Musna ba'arad Yisrael, there is a plague in Eretz Yisrael. Gazar Tanisa, he instituted a fast day. And Omar, he said, Im Gevira Loka, if the master gets hit, Shif Chalakosha, the maid servant certainly also has to worry about getting hit. In other words, Eretz Yisrael is like the master of all the world. We are all like the maid servants to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, if Eretz Yisrael is a plague, it's a plague for all of us, which is a good way to think just in general. We find out sometimes it's very easy for us to just be mafki ourselves and say, listen, it's Eretz Yisrael, it's far away, we don't live there. If Eretz Yisrael has problems, we have problems as well. Taima de Gevira. The reason why is because it's like the master. V'shivcha, hashivcha, v'shivcha lo. What if it was two different cities, two different maidservant cities? V'ha'amr l'shmuel. Have they not said to Shmuel, Ika musna bechuzai and Gazar Tanisa? Didn't he say that they have to fast even though there was a plague in Chuzai, even though that was not Eretz Yisrael? Where it says, Shani Hasam, Kima de Ika, Shayarta, the Levai Asibade, because there are wagons that go back and forth. In other words, there's a lot of travel, a lot of business back and forth, so therefore it's contagious. It's kind of like the COVID, Omicron variant. All of a sudden it's here. It starts in one place, before you know it, it comes over, there's all types of travel, and it goes back and forth, and therefore he recognized that there was a risk of it traveling. There's a beautiful story here I would have loved to learn with you, but you'll have the schos of Mr. Shem tomorrow to learn with Kalman Akiva on Shabbos. It's really a beautiful, beautiful story and a beautiful, overwhelming, incredible daf of Gemara tomorrow. You do not want to miss it. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and Kol Chodesh, and our Freilach and Chanukah.